quite much before 6 p.m., so you should be safe. Hi. So please come in, please have a seat. Very happy to see you all. We're going to have to start. We're starting off a little bit late, but it's always better late than never, I suppose. We have to say that. And indeed, it's very good to see so many people from different backgrounds here with us today. And welcome to Eurogas's annual conference. Indeed, a pathway to solutions. We'll be looking through two panels and through the speeches today at all of the different elements that have been impacting the energy sector, and in particular, the gaseous fuels sector, over the last 12 months. It's been an unprecedented time, as I'm sure you're all aware. We've had many, many difficult challenges that we've had to overcome. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has really set the ball rolling. We've had to look at the emergency measures, and indeed the first panel today will look very deeply at those emergency measures and see how they are coming forward and rolling out. We'll also look at one area where gaseous fuels are set to grow in the future, and that is in the area of transport. Today we'll focus very much on the heavy-duty vehicles file, and indeed we will have a very good debate on that. And I have to say we're very happy that panel has been sponsored today by Landwehr, one of the main biomethane companies in Europe. And so very grateful to Zoltan Elek and his team for agreeing to sponsor us today and helping us bring this conference together. I think without further ado, I would like to invite the president of Eurogas, Didier Holleaux, to come forward and give the welcome speech. Unfortunately, Didier has COVID today and will not therefore be in person, but he will be joining us online. So please pay attention to the screens, and I expect to see him appearing any second now. Didier, the floor is yours. Welcome, Didier.
Thank you, James. And I'm very sorry not to be with all our Eurogas friends today in Brussels, but I think it's better that I remain isolated for the time being rather than give you an unwelcome microbe or virus of any kind. As an introduction, I just wanted to underline four very important points for Eurogas. First, to reiterate that we are absolutely committed to the reduction of the global footprint of the gas industry, and particularly as far as greenhouse gases are concerned. That means that we are committed to net zero before 2050. That means that we are fighting very heavily against methane emission. That means also that we welcome the fact that in the Net Zero Industrial Act, the Commission has recognized biomethane and electrolyzer as strategic industry for Europe. We think that it's very important because without this technology, without also CCS, which is an important target, it will be close to impossible to reach net zero in 2050. If I may add something, I would just like to see one day pyrogasification of solid waste or gasification, hydrothermal gasification of liquid waste, plus a few other technology like methanation, making e-methane with CO2 and hydrogen to be also recognized as strategic. That's my first point. My second point is that we welcome the work done by the European Parliament, and particularly as far as incorporation of the target of 35 BCM of biomethane in the regulation is concerned. But we consider that it's important that we have such targets because it will help mobilize all means of the industry in order to reach this target and develop biomethane up to its potential. We know that there are debates between members of the European Parliament, but not only with the member states about these targets, and we are happy to debate about that, but we think it's efficient to have targets. Third, we are welcoming the efforts done by the Commission in terms of securing natural gas from new suppliers. Energy security in the context created by the aggression of Russia into Ukraine makes it more necessary than ever to make sure that we will have the natural gas we need to ensure a smooth transition in Europe for the years to come. And in that respect, we welcome the words of Vice President Šefčovič, remembering us that natural gas is a part of the energy transition, that long-term contracts are necessary and welcome when they are necessary, and that the only thing which is prohibited is unabated natural gas by 2049. So we are working in order to help the Commission secure this additional supply, including we are collaborating with the Commission in order to make joint purchasing an effective solution. It's not easy because the idea of joint purchasing in itself somewhat contradictory to Article 101 of the treaty. So we need to find a relatively narrow pathway to make it possible and effective. But as Eurogas, we are working with the Commission in order to do that. And fourth point, we consider that gas in transport is an important piece. That's why we are working closely with Natural Gas Association, Natural Gas for Vehicle Association Europe, and that's why we think that particularly as far as heavy-duty vehicles are concerned, biomethane on one side and hydrogen on the other side will provide a significant part of the solution. Obviously, some of the vehicles will use batteries and batteries only, but a lot of them will need other means to ensure that they have the autonomy they require while still emitting zero carbon. And we strongly believe that biomethane and hydrogen are part of this solution. So we hope that the present conference today will help either to make some progress or at least reiterate the necessity to make some progress on these 4 items. And once again, I'm sorry not to be with you today, but I wish you a very fruitful conference. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Didier, and we do wish you a speedy recovery, and we hope that the symptoms are not too bad. Vice President Šefčovič was supposed to be joining us this afternoon, but something to do with unruly Brits, which I think many of us may know. He has, of course, been called away to the General Affairs Council and couldn't join us today. He has been good enough to send us a video message, though, so there will be a video message. But that means that I'm going to change the order because President Buzek is here, and I would therefore like to give the European Parliament representative the chance to speak in person to you all. And so, President Buzek, Jerzy, the floor is yours. We're very keen to hear your views on how you see the developments and challenges within the gaseous fuels sector and energy in general. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And this really extraordinary meeting of Eurogas, annual meeting, and also, well, presence even in remote way, Vice President Šefčovič is very, very important. So thank you very much for that, for such an opportunity for me. And let me say, good news, we've got probably today, first day of full spring in Europe. And it means that we could survive over the whole winter and without supply of gas from Russia and almost any other fossil fuels from Russia, almost any other. So it's great success. We should remember about that. Because maybe 1.5 years ago, 1 year ago, we could not even imagine something like that. My goodness, it's impossible. Everything is possible if we are united, determined, and we know where to go and why. And all the reasons for such a great decisions and remarkable achievements. Everything is in front of us. We should be successful also next year and after the next year as well. We remember very well gas storage regulation was absolutely crucial. Well, I feel responsible for that, and it was working very well. And on the other hand, well, everything what has been done by Vice President Maroš Šefčovič, he was responsible for Energy Union in the last term of European Commission and European Parliament. Energy Union. So everything, almost everything was in his hand. So congratulations, Maroš, for such achievements. Well, more worrying news could be some difficulties also next winter. It means winter 2024. Now it's 2023 winter. Next one will be 24, and even 25. Winter of 25. International Energy Agency says something about that, and we should go very quickly through all the general approach. First of all, general approach to the issue, and short-term and long-term perspectives. We should solve the problems. Well, everybody is quoting Winston Churchill. We know very well. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Okay, we have done what was possible to do. Energy independence, accelerated energy transition. It could be sometimes very thorny for all of us because it's a lot of money and difficulties also on the market and so on and so on. Could be unexpected for our industry, for our citizens. Of course, it's dangerous because we should say that we can manage in such a situation, and we should go further. Well, Winston Churchill said also, if you are going through hell, keep going. So let us go forward, never back, never back. And we should remember the heroic nation of Ukraine, our children and grandchildren, and the planet Earth would never forgive us if we go back. So it's impossible to go back. Let us go forward. And thank you, Eurogas, for all your decisions. Also over last year, it was difficult for Eurogas, it was especially difficult for Eurocall as well, maybe, sometimes, or from point of view of oil market and some other issues were very difficult. But still, we should go forward, not to stand up and wait. For politicians, industry, energy sector, citizens, everything is rather difficult. But we should, as I said at the beginning, we should be determined, united and calm about the whole issue, and then it will be easier. Well, dear friends, let us say very honestly, Mr. Putin become weaker and weaker after the decision of International Criminal Court. You can say that it means nothing because we don't have possibilities to go forward with the preliminary decision of International Criminal Court. But it's a very big and great news for all of us because we treat the president of Russia on the same level of president, like president of Venezuela or some other absolutely last between democratic countries, representatives of Africa, of Asia. So it is quite different level, absolutely different than 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And it was even signal from Berlin. If he is present there, he will go to jail. There's no other possibility for Germans. For 124 countries signed this regulation, not the United States of America. So we should say, no, you haven't signed the declaration on International Criminal Court. It's your fault. But let us finish this issue, because I should inform you, as a member of European Parliament and feeling responsible for many, many issues, that it is not only for colleagues from European Parliament, most of them, overwhelming majority, is not only no business as usual with Russia, no business with Russia at all. And we should be very serious about that. For European Parliament, it's quite clear. We should think on the perspective of few years, 1 decade. We should not say, because we are not serious and we cannot predict what will be in 15 years, maybe 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. Of course, everything could be open, but not for the perspective of 5, 7, maybe even 10 years. No business with Russia at all. Well, let us go to Repower EU plans. Very great communication. Few weeks after aggression, as you know. And what is the key? To quickly translate all the preliminary decisions into solid legal framework in Repower EU plan. So, increased renewable energy sources target for 2030, very good. We need to do the same with targets for biomethane, hydrogen, priority corridors for hydrogen. It is very, very close to all of your activities, because we propose in European Parliament to have both natural gas and hydrogen in the same European entity, and so G and H together. So it means to share responsibility. So we need you, and we need your approach, because you are very experienced, first of all, in the gas sector. And we should introduce step by step hydrogen, priority corridors for hydrogen, very, very important. As you know, everything is written in the decarbonized gas and hydrogen package, and I was also responsible for negotiations. Now we start negotiations in a few weeks or few months, depends on Council, with the Council as European Parliament. And we've got a mandate, very, very strong mandate. Well, let me say, International Energy Agency and their perspective of 1 year, 30 billion of cubic meters of natural gas shortfall. It is also incredible information for all of you, and you, I am quite sure you feel responsible for such shortages, and you can manage with that. But we should go. We have to structurally reduce energy demand, still valid, speed up improvements in energy efficiency in the deployment of renewables, including renewable gases and heat pumps, as well as in implementation of joint purchasing mechanism. We proposed, personally, even I proposed something like that 13 years ago. My goodness. Most of you were even not present on the gas market in those times, so it is possible that you not remember anything. Together with Jacques Delors, who was President of the European Commission in the 90s of last century. Well, my goodness. History. Long-term perspective and solutions. Well, everything is in our hand. We should always remember in such a long-term solutions, security, supply, affordability, competitiveness, absolutely necessary. well, so from that point of view, hydrogen and decarbonized gas market package is very important. And we should develop green and low carbon hydrogen, but also biomethane. And of course, biomethane is nothing else than the natural gas. It's absolutely the same. So you can feel and understand that your responsibility is forever, because we will never stop with something like biomethane, because it's renewable gas. And also to incorporate all the hydrogen issues to our gas sector is very important as well. Well, we also wrote some important issues in our package European Parliament on biomethane. We introduced a 35 billion of cubic meter target of sustainable biomethane for member states to reach collectively by 2030. It is a Repower EU plan, and well, it could be injected to our natural gas, but in my opinion, not more than 2% on interconnectors, of course. Inside member state, you can use 15% or 20%. Well, hydrogen corrosion and so on could be dangerous. Well, I prefer not to use such a mixture, to use hydrogen entities, pure hydrogen, and natural gas or biomethane. And it was also a proposal in my report, and it was voted in European Parliament. We need also to establish regional maps that identify the areas with the highest potential for sustainable biogas and biomethane production. Well, it's also demand from you and expectation from you to take such strategies on board, especially together with member states, because each member state shall establish national strategies for biomethane, sustainable biogas, in order to establish a trajectory to reach the identified potentials by 2030 and 2050. We've got a great potential in European Union, and we should use it. And of course, we give regulatory authorities possibilities to offer support to lower grid connection costs and fees for biogas and biomethane production facilities. It is also in our package. In European Parliament, we are waiting for a common position from the side of the Council, and we are ready to start negotiations immediately. So it is a new package on gas market, and new also together with hydrogen this time. And of course, it is parallelly to new electricity market design. And we always cooperate together, gas and electricity. Now it will be gas, hydrogen and electricity. We would like to incorporate ACER, but ENTSO-E as well. Not only ENTSO-G in the future, together with H, ENTSO-G and H, plus ENTSO-E, because hydrogen, green hydrogen, from renewables, of course, so from electricity. So to incorporate is very important. We should think about that. You should think about that as an entity so responsible in our European energy history. Clear strategies, their thorough implementation and cooperation between policymakers, industry and consumers is key for making our short, medium and long-term goals a reality. I'm sure today's debate will contribute to reaching our common goals. Resilient, competitive and sustainable European Union, it's a triangle we know very well, and we repeat something like that for decades. So from that point of view, nothing new. But except of such a triangle, almost everything is new in our current situation in European Union, also from the point of view of energy sector. So all the best to you, to Eurogas, and thank you very much for all your achievements. Thank you.
Much. Thank you, Jerzy. Thank you, President Buzek. Really great to have you with us today. Thank you. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, we are indeed very grateful to President Buzek for those points, and I think that it is very clear it has been a challenging year for the sector, for energy in general. We will reiterate, as you rightly mentioned, President Buzek, that Eurogas stands very clearly behind the decision not to use Russian gas by the end of this decade. Fully support that point of view. But likewise, with one eye on the future, we also fully support the 35 billion cubic meters of biomethane target, and also the development of green hydrogen here in Europe. Those are important elements of the REPowerEU, but of course they will have to be added to by other initiatives, and we see things like the CCUS strategy is also a very important part of our overall decarbonisation pathway. I think that because we have spent much time talking about the emergency measures and also, of course, the war in Ukraine, because Vice President Šefčovič has sent us a video message, we think that it's probably fair to go to Oleksiy Chernyshov right now, because he was expecting to come on about 5 minutes ago. Here's the chairman of the board and CEO of Naftogaz of Ukraine, one of the members of Eurogas, one of the important members of our family, and we're very happy to have Oleksiy with us this afternoon. And so please, Mr. Chernyshov, the floor is yours. We're all very keen to hear from you, your experiences, and also what we can do to help you in the current crisis situation that you face. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and honor to be part of Eurogas annual conference. Naftogaz is the largest national Ukrainian energy company. My task as the CEO of Naftogaz is secure provision of and stable provision of gas and heating services to more than 12.5 million Ukrainian households, as well as municipalities, cities, central heating plants, electric plants, as well as industry, and many more. And I am happy, and I would like to state that this winter, Ukraine has survived and Ukraine has passed. Practically, due to the serious support from European Union and G7 countries, as well as Ukrainian extraordinary resilience. This winter was very complicated, and I think that was the hardest winter in all Ukrainian history, which is obvious. Russians has deliberately targeted energy infrastructure and still doing it. And we have survived more than 15 massive attacks starting October 2022, especially on energy infrastructure. Russians are trying to deprive Ukrainians from basic services, electricity, gas, heating, water, and many more. But all this just encourages Ukrainians to fight and to stand united. Due to the serious damages in energy infrastructure, Ukraine should have increased natural gas consumption for this winter to generate more electricity. And I would like to thank and express all the gratefulness to our allies that have supported Ukraine with grants and loans that were successfully implemented by EBRD that allowed Ukraine to purchase and import additional volumes of gas for this winter. As it was said, we are now should think of the winter 24, and I absolutely agree with the winter 25. Ukraine is already preparing for that, and my target as CEO of Naftogaz is to satisfy Ukrainian needs with domestic production of gas starting this year. Ukraine is a rich country in terms of resources and explored resources, especially natural gas. We are the third in Europe with our capacities and explored and confirmed capacities, and we are to produce as much gas as we need. We do have an ambitious plan for next winter to avoid imports or to use imports only in case if they're that needed. That means something went not according to the plan. But the base plan is to produce as much natural gas as it's needed. We all should understand that the consumption has fell down due to the obvious reasons and to the industry downturn and economic downturn. And that is why this plan is absolutely possible. And I do believe within 2 or 3 years, Ukraine can become finally a net exporter of natural gas. This doesn't mean Ukraine is not continuing transition and green transition. We do have projects as Naftogaz in renewables, in solar, wind, biomethane, and others. But clearly, during the state of war, our task is to survive and to be stably guaranteed with appropriate resources. I would like to say a couple of words on our next steps. We plan to increase domestic production of natural gas. We plan to increase domestic production of oil and refineries, and that is absolutely possible. We do plan to increase investment in CapEx into the natural gas production this year. And of course, we might be interested in additional support and potential partnership and investment. During the course of the war, we should also remember Ukraine owns the biggest gas storages in Europe. We do have 31 BCM of storage, which are located in the western part of Ukraine. They're absolutely underground and secure. There is a sort of volume, I would say 50% of volume, that is absolutely available for European countries to be used to store natural gas for its own security needs. We do consider Ukraine might be positioned as an energy security hub for the European Union. With the extensive storages and with increased domestic production of natural gas, we can definitely be the energy storage of Europe. Naftogaz is developing by itself. We have implementing corporate governance reforms and many more steps towards the transparent and European approach. Recently, we have implemented the new supervisory board, which consists of independent members, mainly from European and American companies, and we target to implementing a new strategy of development of Naftogaz into energy company. Energy company present in gas segment, in oil segment, in renewables, and also chemicals. It's very important to remember that Ukraine is used to be an agricultural country as well, and fertilizer production might be also the case for this country. Using this opportunity, I would like to thank you all and to thank nations that you represent for the extraordinary support of Ukrainian people, being here in Ukraine, where I am right now, or being in Europe, providing homes and services. We value it a lot, and I want you to know that Ukrainians are standing united and fighting until the end, and Ukraine shall prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oleksiy. It's really great that you could join us today. I know in very difficult circumstances. And indeed, we are very happy that we are able to have him with us. But if any of you are able to support the work that is ongoing with companies like Naftogaz, please do let us know and we'll be able to put you in touch with them, as of course they are looking for whatever help they can also get to keep the infrastructure going. So spare parts, technical expertise, and so on and so forth. I think that we will now move on from the speeches We will play Vice President Šefčovič's introductory speech. I think we'll play it after the first panel because we do have some time constraints with some of the guests on the first panel. And so without further ado, we will move on to look at that emergency regulatory system that was set up in response to the war in Ukraine and the great impacts that it has had on the gas sector and how we've all coped with the new situation that we've found in. And as I said earlier, with one eye also on the future, how we will actually develop the next generation of gases to make sure that they are there in sufficient volumes. That is, of course, a very important element of this situation. I'm delighted to say that Sasha Twining is back with us this year, who will be the moderator for our panels. I think many of you are familiar with Sasha. Of course, she is a journalist well known for her BBC radio and TV shows, and is indeed very, very familiar with the gas sector. So, Sasha, really big round of applause to welcome you, and maybe you want to bring your panel up. Thank you, Sasha.
James, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And actually, yes, let me introduce our first panel, because as James says, we're going to start talking about the emergency situation that we are in now and the emergency measures. We will go into depth on heavy-duty transport a little later. So if I could welcome my panel onto stage in the interest of time, if you could come up as I give your name, please. Please welcome Cristina Lobillo Borrero from the European Commission, Dennis Hesseling, who will be joining us online, Matthias, who can come and join us now, and Miroslav, Kulla, if you could come and join us as well. And now we can give everyone a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Cristina. Thank you. And we should have Dennis with us as well. Fantastic. Let me just check you can hear us all right, Dennis. You obviously can, as you raised your hand there. Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, what Eurogas has decided to do is to allow all of our panelists to take just a few minutes to outline their position on the emergency measures at the moment, how they see them working, and what they feel is the appropriate way forward. So, Cristina, if I may, turn to you first to get your views on this one. Do you want to come to the podium, or are you're quite happy here? Fine. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Eurogas for inviting me as representative from DG Energy in the European Commission. This event, I know it takes place every year, but I think that this year makes more relevance if we think of the specific situation that the European Union is facing now, and in particular the last year. I think that the last year, 2022, was an unprecedented year in the European Union. First of all, because of the war in Ukraine. So the war is always a human tragedy. And in the European Union, we have done our utmost to support Ukraine, to support the people in Ukraine. From the Department of Energy, we have basically contributed to help on some energy areas, in particular the synchronization on electricity. That was done in the record time, just a few months after the invasion of Ukraine. And we have also worked on solidarity, on gas, and also on how to supply generators, transformers, and all the devices that Ukraine needs to support to help Ukrainian citizens in the war. But also these wars have created unprecedented crisis in the European Union on both energy prices, but also security of supply. And in 2022, we managed to adopt 6 legislative packages. That was also unprecedented in the European Union if we take, or we think all the time that we need in the European Union to get a regulation adopted, but we use an emergency legislative basis, and we adopted almost 7, I would say, because one was adopted recently, aiming at, first of all, reducing the overall consumption of gas. In the European Union, member states managed to reduce around 20% of gas consumption. That is not entirely good, because we know that some of this reduction came because of the very high gas prices. So we are now in the process to assess which is the structure demand reduction, and demand reduction was created because of the very high gas prices. The second point is that we also accelerated the energy transition. In the European Union, we don't have gas, so our energy mix by 2050 will be basically composed by electrification and basically renewables energies there. So we have created measures to further deploy solar, offshore, wind as well. And the third measure that has been maybe the most immediate and effective has been to replace Russian gas. You know that our leaders in the European Union decided one important political objective to get completely independent from Russia fossil fuels. And in 1 year only, we have replaced more than 70 billion cubic meters of gas. We have replaced from more reliable partners, reliable suppliers, basically from the US, but also from Azerbaijan, from Norway, from Algeria. In particular, with the US, we have a very, very good cooperation, and in particular, the President of the Commission and the President of the United States signed the last year 2 presidential statements, and we managed to import 56 billion cubic meters of American gas in Europe. And we are now continuing this partnership by putting in force some instruments. The last December, the Council of Ministers of the European Union adopted specific measures on solidarity, in particular more or increased solidarity among member states to support each other in case of crisis, in particular security of supply. And we also created the so-called Energy Platform Task Force. That is the first time the European Union will proceed with joint purchase of gas. This is my task in the last year. And we are working very hard with you, companies in Eurogas, with American companies, Algerian, from Azerbaijan, Norway, in order to make this happen. We know that maybe now the instrument is not so attractive as it was a few months ago, because this morning I saw the gas has significantly decreased the price of gas at 39 euro megawatt hour. That is really unbelievable compared to previous months. So this is very good news for the European Union. But we believe that we need to have this instrument in force, because we never know what could happen. The crisis is not over yet. Volatility is the main feature of the markets. And we really want to increase cooperation with companies in member states in order to make or to provide more stability and solidarity to European markets. So I stop here, and maybe my colleagues will now have the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Cristina, thank you very much. Thank you. I have to say, you mentioned the word unprecedented. I think I lost count of how many times. It might well have been 3 times there, 3 or 4 times. Unprecedented, but this situation, as you just said at the end, this is not going away. So if you are talking about increasing solidarity in unprecedented times, what is next? You are doing all these unprecedented moves, but what is the next unprecedented move that you will make?
Exactly. The next steps will be obviously to continue the path to accelerate the energy transition. So for us, energy security and energy transition go hand in hand. So we really believe that in the particular case of the European Union, other countries in the world, they have decided different pathways to decarbonize their economies. In the case of the European Union, as far as we advance more into deploy more energy, renewable energies, but also energy efficiency, new technologies to save energy, this will be for us the next steps, as the European Council recently explained in their conclusions. But obviously, we need to continue to supply gas to the European Union. We know that gas is considered for us a transition energy. So we want to replace completely oil and coal for gas, and this is also one significant area of action that we are now working in the Commission. And we think that it's possible to, obviously, we are not gas producer, but we want to cooperate with our partner supplier of gas. We want also to work with them on reduce methane emissions. So we believe that also it's possible to produce gas in a cleaner way, and this is also the reason why the next steps include real intense work on methane emission reduction. So this is the different action we are doing in the European Union, and obviously trying to be able to proceed with joint purchase of gas, even if the volume at the beginning will not be so high, but we want really to make sure that this is an instrument that European Union can use in the future.
And all of that working at speed.
Indeed.
Very, very, very much so. Cristina, thank you. There'll be an opportunity to ask Cristina some questions towards the end of this panel. But I would like to bring in Dennis, who is joining us online now, Head of Infrastructure, Gas and Retail Department at ACER. Dennis, incidentally, will have to leave us in a little under 10 minutes, so hence why bringing him in now. Dennis, would you like to give your thoughts on enhancing solidarity for us?
Yes, thank you, Sasha, and it's nice to be here. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in the room until this morning. Actually, I didn't know I would be on this panel, so planning was a bit difficult. I'm stepping in for Clara Porletti, the chair of our board, who last moment couldn't make it. What I would say maybe as an introductory remark is if you look back at last year, which of course was a crisis year in many aspects, but I think it also shows the fact that we managed to get gas to every corner of Europe where it was needed is a tribute to the resilience of the European gas market. And that goes back a decade or more to all the developments which were set up in time to develop legislation, to develop network codes, to make sure that there were standard products and booking procedures available to be flexible. And of course, all the market participants who reacted quickly in times of need to make sure the gas came there where it was needed most. And I think that's something which is sometimes overlooked. We focus, of course, on the shortcomings or things which still need to be addressed, whether it's the way in which gas storages are filled or the congestion that we see at some particular Northwest European interconnection points. Those are issues which still need to be addressed, but it doesn't diminish, I think, the value of the big achievement that was a collective achievement last year of making sure that there was still gas available across Europe throughout this very, very difficult year. If I then focus on the emergency measures what have been developed last year, and in particular the ones where ACER has a new role, I'll pick out two. One is this LNG price assessment, which you may have seen on our website. This is mainly a transparency measure. It's something where we collect the transactions of spot LNG coming into Europe on a daily basis, and then we do the calculations to develop a price assessment, basically. And in fact, it comes in two forms. One is a price assessment for Northwest Europe, and the other one is one for South Europe, and they are published daily on our website. We also publish the spread between the two, which is reassuringly narrow. It's below €1 per megawatt hour at the moment, and that means that the market is well connected as it used to be before the whole energy crisis. This is a transparency measure. It doesn't in itself change the market. It provides an extra opportunity for those who want to use it once they get sufficient trust in this price assessment. We often get the question, to what extent does it differ from those price assessments which are commercially available for LNG spot trading into Europe? The main difference is that ours is purely transaction-based. So there's a legal obligation to report all those transactions to ACER. We use that to do the calculation, we publish it. We don't call around the traders to see how they see market developments happening as most commercial parties do. And in that sense, the methodology is different from what you would get from a commercial entity. Is it better or worse? That's up to the market participants to decide. What it doesn't change is the fact that the market itself, this part of the market, so spot LNG deliveries into Europe, is highly illiquid. And then you can apply different methodologies, but you can't change the underlying fact that the market consists of maybe 1 or 2 dozen trades a day. That's it, transactions. That's really limited. We can't change it, but we can make the best of it in terms of reporting for the price assessment. We understand the Commission will propose to include this as part of the remit regulation, so this will become, let's say, a permanent feature of ACER's work and a permanent transparency measure made available to all market participants. The second and more intrusive one, which I'd like to address here, is this MCM, the market correction mechanism, which came as a Christmas gift towards the end of last year, with its two threshold values that you may know. One is the €180 per megawatt hour for TTF front month, and then the second one is the spread between that TTF front month and this LNG basket that we have to calculate of €35 per megawatt hour. And those two conditions, the 180 and the 35, both need to be met before the MCM is activated. And next to activation, there's also deactivation. So when does it stop? And then there's suspension, which is kind of a emergency procedure in case things go wrong once the MCM would be activated. Now, the MCM itself is not something of a permanent regulation of the market. The Commissioner herself said clearly, this is a fallback procedure in case of need. It shouldn't become a regular part of how the market functions. We were tasked together with ESMA. ESMA is our sister agency for financial markets, to look into the effects of the MCM in 2 points, one in January, one in March. And basically, when we look at the indicators that we see for price developments, flows, and trading, we basically don't see any effect neither positive nor negative of the MCM. To some extent, that is reassuring because there were some concerns that energy trading might move away outside the EU jurisdiction into the UK, where it is, well, out of reach, basically, of the MCM. That hasn't happened so far, and probably the low prices that Cristina mentioned are a big contributor to that. Will the MCM stay? We don't know. It's emergency legislation. It's in there for a year. I would imagine that there's an evaluation towards the end of this year to see how effective it has been, what is the cost, what are the benefits, do we still need it going forward? And then we'll see if there's political support for extending it or if it can expire. And then it was something that had to be in place for a year. I will stop here, Sasha, to also allow for some questions if they are. I can stay 5 more minutes to take any questions then maybe.
Dennis, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to hold you to another 5 more minutes then. Fantastic. Actually, Cristina, I'm going to come to you first on the MCM, because as Dennis was talking, I saw you were making notes, and actually there was a look on your face. So I'm just interested to know your thoughts there.
No, indeed, for us, the market correction mechanism was adopted in December, and for us was the only way to have some influence on the TTF index, because we consider further on our analysis, and we work very closely with ACER, that this is a, let's say, transitional measure before we receive from ACER the average of the price that LNG is imported in the European Union, in order to elaborate on the other index that could reflect better the situation of the market. Somehow this measure was new. We never, from the energy perspective, we never adopted a measure that could have an influence on an economic index, but we believe that was a very special, limited, targeted measure that could be activated in the case that some specific circumstances came into force. It was difficult to get this measure adopted by the Commission, because obviously other services were involved, and we need also to assess all the implications that it could have on the financial markets. But we believe that, as it was mentioned before, I think that it has also some implications on the current level of gas prices in the European Union. So we believe that as far as this measure is in force, and in the time that we need to have the average LNG prices that ACER is working on, I think that could be a measure that could serve to contain the increase of gas prices in the European Union. Also combined with other measures, obviously we need to have gas in our storage, and we need to have, so it's a combination of different measures, but definitely the market correction mechanism was one essential to that purpose.
Okay, I will reply, but I think my microphone is being, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a microphone pack being removed at the moment. Would anyone in the room like to ask Dennis a question before we lose him? Is there anyone that particularly wants to come in on what he has said from ACER? If not, let me go to Matthias, because again, just as similar as Cristina was making notes during when Dennis was talking about MCM, you were making quite a few notes and nodding during Dennis's talk about LNG pricing. So I just wondered what your thoughts were there.
I was just confirming what I know. So, no, I didn't have any particular issue with what he was saying. I think it's spot on.
Dennis, I assume that might be a relief. There was no issue with what you were saying. Fantastic. Would anybody else in the room like to raise anything with Dennis? Fantastic. All right, Dennis, thank you so much for joining us. Dennis Hesseling from ACER, thank you. And many thanks as well for jumping in at such late notice as well to be part of this panel. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me turn now to Matthias. We've already introduced you. Matthias, Book Director Europe at Agora Energiewende, the research and think tank. Your thoughts on solidarity, bringing everyone together during the emergency measures?
I brought a few slides, only 2 actually.
Would you like to?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
Let me swap with you.
I mean, just to start, we are a think tank. We're working on the clean energy transition from a climate perspective. That's really our daily work. We have our main office in Berlin. We have offices in Brussels, Beijing, Bangkok in the meantime. And when I started working with Agora, I never expected that I'd spend the first half of 2022 essentially trying to understand how to deal with the acute energy security challenge that we're facing in Europe, which really changed a lot of the thinking on how we need to transition out of fossil fuel use in Europe in order to reach our net zero target. And this is what I want to share with you a few points. So the good news is, I cannot see my own slides, I must say. Ah, yes, thank you. So if you go to the first slide, so Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, of course, has created an immediate fossil fuel supply crisis, a fossil fuel price crisis, linked then to an electricity price crisis. But of course, it does not undo the climate crisis we're in. And I'm just showing you this first slide. That's from the last assessment report of the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, published yesterday, showing that at the moment nowhere near in the national commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on a pathway that keeps us in a fairly safe space when it comes to global warming. At the moment, the median projection is that we would be reaching 3.5 degrees warming by 2100, which is devastating according to all projections. Next slide, please. So, as I was saying, most of the thinking we have been doing is how to combine the climate crisis response with the energy security response. And this is, the good news is, the two go hand in hand, as Cristina was saying in her presentation. And I'm showing here a few data points from the European Commission work on the climate response and the energy security response combined. So the violet column is the Eurostat gas consumption data in 2021. The pink one is what we call the Fit for 55 legislative package. So what the Commission modeling suggests will be the gas demand related to achieving our climate targets in Europe based on the legislation that is currently being finalized between Council and Parliament. The third column, the blue one, is the acceleration in fossil gas demand reduction that is a consequence of the Repower EU plan that the Commission presented in a very rough draft in February, I believe, last year, and then it was formally proposed in May 2022. So you see there is a very significant, across all the sectors, a very, very significant reduction in fossil gas demand based on the current planning that we have. And so we have been very successful in substituting for Russian fossil gas supplies within much faster than we had expected would be possible. We have invested in Europe, I'm from Germany, particularly the German government, into floating LNG terminal capacity to a point where, according to the latest studies done, we are probably in a very safe space. So if the fossil gas demand reduction comes only nearly as expected, we have already overinvested into floating LNG terminal capacity by a factor of about 3. So we would need about 150 BCM, where the capacity is at 500 BCM. We used to say in Germany, it's sometimes good to have the Hosenträger to the belt, yeah, to be really on the safe side, but we are on the safe side when it comes to LNG import capacity. We don't need more LNG import capacity. The next point I want to make is on renewable hydrogen. There is in the Repower plan a massive increase in renewable hydrogen demand by 2030, which we're currently trying to understand how this could be delivered. There will be a very significant part of this renewable hydrogen needs to come from imports, according to the Commission plan. And of course, there's a big question mark how much of this renewable hydrogen will actually come to Europe, in which form. We're now coming to terms with the technical challenges of transporting renewable hydrogen be it in embedded form, in liquefied form, in some derivative products, and how this can be done technically safe and at a cost that keeps Europe competitive going forward. And this is one of the big headaches we're having, looking at the renewable hydrogen import dependency that seems to be part of the current conversation on the topic, that this could bring us into a structurally cost disadvantage, looking at where we need to be in Europe, particularly now with the US speeding up very, very fast on the clean transition. So this is the message I wanted to pass, and I hope it's good for discussion. Thank you.
Matthias, thank you very much. Thank you. Have you looked at, you're talking about the technical challenges of bringing in enough renewable hydrogen. Have you looked at how much is being invested in R&D with those technical challenges? Is that an area where you feel the industry is not really quite pushing forward enough?
No, the point is, if you are, so renewable hydrogen is hydrogen produced based on electrolysis with renewable power. What I didn't talk about is the amount of renewable electricity generating capacity that you actually need to produce these vast amounts of renewable hydrogen. Whether we all know in this room, it's not it's not just happening like this, but we are very much pushing to scale the speed of deployment of renewable electricity generation across Europe, but it is facing some resistance. And so it may not be as fast as we hope it to be. This being said, everything that we can produce domestically in Europe as renewable hydrogen is very, very important. According to our calculations, what we could produce with a renewable capacity that will come on stream, hopefully, brings us into a safe space when it comes to all the demand that we know exists for industry, fertilizer production, etc. But we don't see, as a think tank, renewable hydrogen being used in home heating for certain types of transport, because there are other much more competitive alternatives. And I recently read, like 3 weeks ago, a big modeling effort by Fraunhofer Institute, one of the big German research institutes, looking at the demand side of hydrogen, so looking at the elasticity of demand, and the message is very clear. If it's too expensive, consumers will not use it, but they will turn to other cheaper alternatives, which in most cases is direct electrification.
Thank you. The point of view and the thoughts and the opinions of consumers, absolutely. It's all very well the industry going down one point, but again, as you say, it has to come back to the consumers. Very pleased now to bring in Miroslav Kulla. Miroslav is the chairman of the board and the CEO of SPP. Delighted to welcome you here from Slovakia. Thank you for giving your thoughts on bringing everyone together in these times of emergency measures. We've asked you to give a few minutes for your thoughts. Do you want to come here or stay there?
I can stay here. Thank you very much. So I'm happy that you invited me here to share that's a story of one small European country. I think a few more countries are in similar situations, and probably they will find the same story. I'll start with a little bit introduction. So Slovakia is a small country of 5 million inhabitants, and it's pretty much known that in Eastern Europe we were basically dependent on Russian gas import to more or less 100%. And you can imagine that what happened last year. First of all, as a country, we love gas. It's 80% of cities and villages are connected to the gas grid, and more than 95% of population has access to gas. So you can imagine that for the last 50 years, this is really the fuel of the country, and was a part of the, let's say, economic growth. So it's and primarily dependent on one source. So you can imagine in February, after these 50 years, you see suddenly that you're only supplier for the last 50 years, and so much the dependency and everything changed. So of course it was a shock. I think it's still a shock for the country and people. So as well, I asked a little bit for patience for the country to absorb the changes, because it cannot change the generations that we're building all that to change from day to another. And suddenly we were in the situation really dependent on others, and I'm very pleased to share that despite this difficult situation, we were able basically to diversify the gas, not fully, but still the cooperation worked excellently in Europe. I have to say that if I should say something good about the crisis, is that I've never seen so much, cooperation and discussion with the European countries and private companies and public institutions, etc., to overcome it. So this is really something we should keep, even if the crisis will no longer be there, because this was really something that was needed and will be needed in further crisis. It doesn't have to be necessarily gas crisis. So at the end, in Slovakia, if you imagine that it started in February, but more or less after winter, so more or less we got this 40% of annual supply already from Russia, but the rest of the year, at the end, roughly, let's say 50% of gas was not coming from Russia. So we are continuing in those measures to be able to have gas from let's say different places. Of course, if there, I really would like to ask as well to continue solidarity, because you're fully dependent on the support of other countries. So for us, it's important to have, if not preferential, then at least equal access to infrastructure, to LNG terminals, to the transportation capacities, etc. Without that, and if any of the countries would not be basically keeping the solidarity or just working unilaterally, then basically we cannot import the gas. So to give you that flavor, or in 2009, when I basically was CEO of one utility company, and we experienced the gas crisis, I just asked the colleagues in other European countries, how this will work if now we don't get the gas from East? Nobody ever thought about it. We look at the transportation, and guess what? There is one company that booked 80% of transportation capacity west to east already before that happened. We have similar situation now. So if you buy now the gas, for example, in Germany, we actually have to accept Gazprom and other players who book the capacities to get it to east. So I think there is some work to be done that nobody can block, the free trade and transportation capacities or LNG terminals or whatever infrastructure. Otherwise, basically, these smaller countries inland who don't have access to sea or own production will face difficulties in next years. And of course, this is then a bottleneck for the country, for the general perception of EU and how it works. That if this is happening, it's very difficult then to change the habits that we used to have 50 years.
I think that's a really interesting final point. Actually, it's very difficult to change those habits. It's not just changing habits, it's changing all the agreements, the regulations, the infrastructure, everything that you have. So give us an idea of where your supply comes from now. Is it LNG from Poland with those agreements there, or where? And if you can put us into the future, what is the ideal situation for where your supply would come from? Is it internal, or is it still with imports?
Well, I think we have to separate short-term and long-term solutions. So short-term, we are really dependent, so we can switch from day to another. So we learned the lesson. So of course, we are now aiming at a solution where we have at least 3 sources of gas. So we're looking for each direction, basically, to get the gas from. So it doesn't matter if it's basically more or less north or the west or the south, but basically more or less, if I could say, 1/3 each of the directions. Of course, we have more options. One is basically to get the gas from midstreamers, so basically larger companies acting on our behalf, and just get the gas at the border, or then really going into investments and going to LNG terminals or book the capacities, or even having the LNG contract with the producers. Yeah, so that's I think short term is a kind of mixture rather with midstreamers, and in medium term having some access to LNG. As we don't have any production in Slovakia, I think anyway there's a rather long term issue to replace it with renewables and other new technologies. But I think this is really a couple of years to go.
Okay, so years to go. I mean, I said to you short term or long term. So how many years for you is long term, and is there that desire then to invest in renewables and to move your percentages more onto renewables from internal sources? How many years?
Yeah, I think we are really lagging behind in terms of the renewables deployment in the country. But as well, we have to understand as well that in terms of the fossil fuels, gas is clear. It's the main source primarily for heating. And but for the electricity generation, there is no such strong will, because basically we already have majority of the production of electricity from nuclear power plants and water. So hydro. So basically very limited, almost no coal. So more or less, if you look at the map, we are, if you say nuke is let's say green or non-CO2 emitting, then in terms of the CO2 emission, basically we are basically one of the leaders in the EU. You know, so let's say the more will to deploy renewables and even more of the investments is a bit difficult. And so we have to understand this is not the richest country. You know, so of course there are limited resources that have to be basically considered before we make the bold moves. Yeah.
Cristina, do you want to come in there with your reaction to how to, increase solidarity when you hear what Miroslav's saying?
Yes, indeed, because this is not new in the European Union. We started working on solidarity among member states many years ago. In particular, 8 years ago, we also developed this strategy on LNG and on solidarity among member states. Member states have the obligation to conclude solidarity agreements. Among them, I must say that not all member states have concluded this agreement, but there is also a solidarity. It doesn't work now. Yeah. It works exactly. We also reinforce the solidarity obligation among member states the last December with a new proposal in the context of the emergency. But maybe there is one point that I want to highlight that I think is important. And you mentioned, Miroslav, the need of infrastructure, the need to be well connected, because the only possibility we have to ensure security of supply to member states is not only to have the gas, we need to import gas, but we need also all member states to be properly interconnected in order to receive the gas. So I'm talking also about LNG plants. So here the European Union adopted, both the legislator, the European Parliament and the Council adopted this additional 20 billion euros in the concentratory power. That it's somehow how the European Union has opened a small window to invest on infrastructure that are related to gas, and even to update it on some refineries on oil in Hungary, because we consider that this targeted and limited investment on fossil fuels infrastructure could really help to get independent from Russian supplier of gas. And in that sense, obviously, this 20 billion will not cover everything. We know that we also need private investment, and at the same time, it's difficult to get private investment on the infrastructure dedicated to gas. So for me, it's a combination on the very immediate investment on the infrastructure that are needed, and at the same time, obviously, to accelerate investment on renewable, but also on hydrogen. We have talked about renewable hydrogen. We don't have a market in the European Union at this stage today on renewable hydrogen, but we need to create the basis to develop that. Today, I think it's only 0.1% is renewable hydrogen in the European Union. 98% come from gas and nuclear. But we believe that these are energy for the future, and we need to create the basis. The last week, the European Commission adopted the hydrogen bank. It's not a lot of money, but there are 3 billion that could also help to set up the basis for developing a market of renewable hydrogen.
Matthias, do you want to come in on that one when we're talking about investment and where that investment is channeled, whether or not it is public or private, and as Cristina says, it's very difficult to get investment into gas. What are your thoughts? What have you seen in your research on that?
So what we've seen is, because we were in a crisis situation, an acute energy security crisis, it was the right thing to do to use enormous amounts of public funding to close some of the gaps in our security framework, put it this way, and to go and purchase gas as fast as possible, to close some of the infrastructure gaps. This was absolutely the right thing to do. What we are arguing for and showing with a lot of the research we're doing, that when it comes to not the very short term, but really the 2 to 3 or 5 year horizon, that in most cases it is economically more advantageous and also more consistent with our climate pathway to invest into structural reduction of fossil gas demand, be it through faster ramping up of renewable electricity capacity, be it So investing particularly very low-hanging fruit and low-temperature heat in industry, a lot, like about 40% of the gas demand there could be replaced within 3 years, according to our calculations, be it heat pumps in buildings for home heating. So it is really critical, and this is why we are trying to also help structure the debate to get the balance right. It's not that we are against investing into hydrogen. Actually not. We were amongst the first to make the case that Europe needs to build up renewable hydrogen as an energy carrier for the industry transformation in particular, and for some other sectors where direct electrification is not an option. But looking at the overall landscape at the moment, we do see, let's say, an imbalance in the sense that there's a lot of attention on hydrogen, but not sufficient commitments to scale up heat pump capacity in Europe, to scale up battery storage capacity in Europe. So all these other clean tech lead technologies that we know that are part of the solution, because hydrogen is in itself not a source of energy, it's an energy sink, and it's an inefficient carrier if you compare it to direct electrification. So it's very important to have it, to store energy, but it's not as such a solution. And at least for the next decade, we really need to get the balance right and not to use too much of the renewable electricity that we're generating for producing renewable hydrogen.
Let's, if I may, I'm going to ask the room what could be quite a tricky question. You will decide on which side you come down on this. I'd like to see some hands up from the panel on stage as well. When we are thinking about the emergency measures, the situation that we are in at the moment, do you see those measures, and this is following on directly from what Cristina and Matthias were just saying, do you see the emergency measures that we're in at the moment as directly helping the transition away from carbon fuels or prolonging the life of natural gas? So it's very difficult, but where we are at the moment, so would you like to raise your hands if you think it's actually helping, the emergency measures are helping that transition away? If you would like to raise your hands. Nobody? Okay, we've got 1, 2. Okay, and if you think, I have no one on stage? Okay. Prolonging the life of natural gas? Okay, so is that a so-so? Cristina, you're like, yeah.
It depends on how.
Yeah. There was a lot of hands not raised, so I think people are like, maybe I'm not going to say, or I will look round first. Let's get some questions from the audience. If I can have the microphone down at the front, please. Gentleman in the jumper at the front. Thank you. If you'd like to introduce yourself first.
Yes, I will. I'll stand up as well. My name's Mike Parr. The question is for Mr. Book. I run a company called PWR. I'm a power systems engineer. I used to run electrical power networks, and I'm familiar with low voltage networks. Mr. Buck said that there wouldn't be much gas heating in the future. The future is heat pumps and things like that. The problem is that we did some work in this area, and electrical networks on the low voltage side, as they are currently constituted in the residential sector, will not support lots and lots of heat pumps. You may get a penetration of 20% or something like that, and that's as far as you're going to get. And we validated this with discussions with members of Eurogas, such as Thuga, who run both electrical networks and gas networks, and they confirmed our findings that unless you rebuild the entirety of the low voltage network in Europe, you're going to struggle to get all the heat pumps that you expect into the system.
Okay.
There we are. That's the point in the question.
Brilliant, thank you. Heat pumps on many different areas. People have very, very different views. Matthias, did you want to respond to that?
I think there's very wide agreement that at the distribution system level, and this goes particularly for the electricity network, a lot of investments will need to happen to modernize the system, because we will have many more, both at the level of generating electricity, if you think about all the rooftop PV on buildings, some of the smaller wind parks, they will feed at the the lower voltage level into the grid. They will not be at kind of for transmission. And so the grid of the future will need to be smarter because of the much more decentralized system. And I believe this is widely acknowledged as a challenge.
Okay. I'm going to put you two together later, if I may, and you can have a conversation. We have a question here. I'm very conscious of time. There's another one here. But the gentleman here has actually his hands already on the microphone. Just a short question, if I may, sir.
David Abiyago, journalist for Argus Media. For Cristina, sorry. In terms of the platform and the joint purchasing, are we still at the volumes that we heard from Maroš Šefčovič at the beginning of the month? Was it 17 billion and is it 22 member states? And how many member states don't want to take part? And then to go to link into what Didier said, he sees it as somewhat contradictory. I think those are his words. To Article 101 for the competition. Have you solved those? Because we're still looking at a mid-April launch date, right? There's not much time.
Yeah. Can you do it, and can you do it at speed?
Sure. Well, the mechanism is voluntary, so there is no any obligation from companies or member states to use the mechanism. But there is one compulsory element that this member state need to aggregate 15% of the volume that are compulsory for the filling of the storage. And here we have received information on aggregated demand from basically all member states. We are still missing 3 or 4, but they will come this week. So we are in the process to aggregate demand, and we have these figures with us. Vice President Šefčovič mentioned, I think, around 25, 27 BCM. That will be somehow the aggregated demand this year and also next winter. So this is the aggregated demand that we have at this stage. When it comes to the launching of the tenders, they will happen in May. So April is the month to proceed with the aggregation of the demand by member states. And beginning or mid-May, we'll proceed with the 28 different points for launching the tenders. So 26 member states plus North and South to do the different tenders in the member states. When it comes to competition, I think that, we have been working with companies in Eurogas since the beginning of the process. The platform has been created because the European Council asked the Commission to create it. So since the beginning, we have been working with DG Competition. And when it comes to the companies who will cooperate together, I won't prefer to use this word instead of other that we used in the past. So now the companies who will cooperate together to buy gas and to sell this gas through gas-consuming companies through the platform. Obviously, they will need to respect some principles that are set in the competition law in the European Union. Maybe just to be completely transparent with you, we are still working on these principles. So we have not concluded our conversation with the companies. So we are in this process, and hopefully we'll be able to have, I hope so, an agreement by April or the end of this month or April. But so far we have also advanced very much on how the two different models for companies to cooperate together. Could be central buyer or agent on behalf, but we are defining these two models that in our view will be the most realistic way for companies to buy gas through the platform and to offer this gas to gas-consuming companies in the European Union who face enormous difficulties to buy gas, in particular the last year in the context of a crisis. So this is the situation today, and ongoing work, completely new experience in the European Union. And this is the information I can share with you at this stage. Thank you.
Just if I can, and then just a final question from the gentleman at the back. On a scale of 1 to 10, if we could, just how confident are you that it will work and work in the time frame you've set yourselves?
I am obliged to say 10 because because I am the director of the platform, so I would say 10.
Thank you. Just one final quick one on this particular panel. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. Philippe Guérec from Hybrid Heating Europe. I have a question because I hear I kind of hear that we oppose renewable gas, renewable electricity, but wouldn't be we be better by combining them? I'm thinking of a solution like hybrid heating system, like hybrid heat pumps, because heat pumps are very efficient if they are using directly renewable electricity. If we have to go through the process of storing for seasonal demand and then redoing electricity, we have many losses there. But when you combine the solution, you combine the advantages and you get two large advantages, I think. The first is you're able to bring flexibility to the system to optimize the renewable electricity integration. And plus, you have a tool to manage the grids and to optimize investment in the grids. And for me, it's a way to go faster and safer. But I would like to have your view on that.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to, Matthias, I think that was directed at you, or maybe wasn't. Yes?
There's a lot of research on heating homes, and a colleague of mine from the Regulatory Assistance Project, you can look him up at Twitter or LinkedIn, he's collecting all the independent research on the feasibility of using heat pumps to heat your homes. We're at 37 independent studies now, and all of these studies point to electric heat pumps and not to any other type of heat pumps as the solution. Thank you.
I think probably, James, you're going to have to organise another heat pump forum or something similar for all of these. I have a nod down there and a thumbs up at the back, so, and another one there. So I'm sure we can bring it all together. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very conscious of time. I'm just going to bring James back up in a moment, and then there will be a coffee break. But if I could just thank our panellists for our first panel. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. I think, in fact, what we will do, if it's okay with our guys, the VT, we'll actually roll the Maroš Šefčovič welcome speech now, just before we go into coffee, and it'll give us something to speak about. And yes, indeed, panelists, feel free to evacuate the stage so you can watch more easily. So thank you for that. We will give the floor to Maroš Šefčovič, Vice President of the European Commission, and in charge, for those who don't know, of the overall political coordination of the energy platform.
Good afternoon. Many thanks to Didier for his warm welcome and to Eurogas for inviting me to speak to you today, even if I cannot be there in person. The topic of your conference is of utmost importance as Europe has faced an unprecedented energy crisis in the wake of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Any opportunity to discuss potential solutions is very much welcome. The crisis is having a direct impact on the wider European economy, not least by threatening its competitiveness as well as our social model. High energy prices combined with increasingly assertive, even hostile economic policies globally are constraining industrial production in Europe and making companies consider moving elsewhere. Unless reversed, this trend will inevitably lead to our companies lowering their demand for gas. There is no longer any acceptance among the EU leaders, not for that matter ordinary Europeans, for high energy prices generating windfall profits for certain gas operators. Instead, we are asking the energy industry to act in a spirit of solidarity by supplying gas at more sustainable prices, in other words, putting long-term benefits before short-term gains. This approach will only become more important in the months ahead. Energy prices may have come down, but they are still 3 times higher than before the war, and they are up to 7 times higher than in the US. However, that stabilization might only be temporary due to continued vulnerability of the global LNG market to supply and demand shocks and the likely strong rebound of the Chinese economy. In response, as a part of our efforts to reduce the EU's overdependency on Russian fossil fuels under the Repower EU plan, we are accelerating our decarbonization efforts. This means rapidly increasing the role of renewable energy and continuing to improve energy efficiency and lower demand. To this end, last week, the Commission also laid out plans to reform the EU's electricity market design to better protect consumers from future price spikes. In the shorter term, and with gas set to remain a key energy source for the next 3 decades, we are significantly reinforcing our gas infrastructure, including by rapidly expanding our current portfolio of LNG regasification terminals from 27 to 35. We are leveraging our full political and market weight to buy, for the first time ever, gas together through the EU energy platform. The key message I have for you today is that joint purchasing of gas will be up and running by mid-April. Working with Prisma, we are looking to aggregate the first demand next month and publish the first tender for reliable international gas suppliers in May. Here, let me thank Eurogas and its members for your engagement and support in the process of designing this first ever joint purchasing of gas. I'm pleased to note that there is a great deal of interest, not only from gas companies, but also from major European industrial customers. Our largest industrial sectors, including chemicals, fertilizers, ceramics, glass, aluminium, steel, paper, and automotive, see the platform as an opportunity to secure stable supplies of gas, especially at lower prices for their manufacturing processes. So far, the EU member states, as well as Ukraine, Moldova, and Serbia, have expressed their preliminary interest in aggregating the demand of some 24 billion cubic meters of gas over the next 3 years. But I believe that with a positive response from suppliers following our recent discussions, the total volumes of gas aggregated and offered on the platform will ultimately be higher. We have been striving to make the platform attractive for companies and ensure their active engagement on both the demand and the supply side. We have taken on board many of the suggestions and recommendations made in the industry advisory group, in the regional groups, and in the working group bringing together Eurogas, DG Energy, and DG Competition. First, the platform will facilitate demand aggregation in view of achieving better conditions with suppliers. For suppliers, the platform provides an opportunity to expand their consumer base. Second, the joint purchasing will remain voluntary. We will also respect the confidentiality of the trading, with the actual contracting of gas being organized bilaterally outside the scope of the platform. Third, we have jointly identified the most efficient and operational structure for organizing the cooperation of companies on the demand side. The agreed models, a central buyer and an agent on behalf, will also address industry's concerns related to compliance with EU competition rules. Neither will they require ex ante or ex post scrutiny by our competition authorities. Fourth, we have simplified procedures, standardized products, and kept it free of charge. Fifth, the platform provides the possibility to gas companies to offer additional commercial services such as transport and balancing to the industry by playing the role of a central buyer. With all this collaborative work, I trust that you will join the platform, either as a buyer, supplier, central buyer, or agent on behalf. The first step of the registration process, that is with Prisma, started on 14th of March. The second step, the registration on Aggregate EU, will be launched by mid-April. Furthermore, this week, Prisma will launch a call for expressions of interest for companies willing to act as central buyers and agents on behalf. As a final point, let me underline that the platform remains high on the political agenda, with the EU leaders set to discuss it again when they meet in Brussels later this week. I expect a clear message to all stakeholders involved to make full use of the joint purchasing to further improve the security of gas supplies at affordable prices. Your participation in the platform, strong both in number and volume, would send a clear message of the gas industry's spirit of solidarity and constructive contribution to tackling the energy crisis. Together with my team and Prisma, I remain fully at your disposal for further discussions. Thank you, and I wish you a pleasant conference.
Thank you.
Just to say thanks very much to Vice President Šefčovič for that. I'm sure we'll all be watching in the middle of April to see what happens next. This is clearly the time to test the cake, shall we say, and see how we've baked it. We are supposed to be already, I think, 13 minutes into our coffee break, so I will extend the time to 4:30. If you could just quickly grab a coffee and return. We have a very interesting speech from our supporters, Landwehrme, who will be introducing the panel on the use of gaseous fuels in the future in the heavy-duty vehicles section. Thank you very much for your attention during the first half. We look forward to seeing you in the second. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to come and take your seats now, thank you. Lovely, thank you very much. And we're ready to start again. There is more time at the end for networking and for having these conversations. I know we are still all getting used to being back in the room and actually doing business face to face and having those conversations. And it is fantastic, I know. We've built in time later this afternoon. But please, if you could come and take your seats now. Fantastic. Just going to wait for that little group over there. I think we're all there. Wonderful. Okay, lovely. Do take your seats. Fantastic. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to talk about low carbon and renewable gases within heavy duty transport. Now, this is an area, I know that it is a particularly tricky area, a challenging area, an area that is talked about a lot, an area that a lot of people are trying to come up with different solutions for, but it is also, as we all know, a crucial area to crack. It is an area that has to be dealt with. So what we're going to do this afternoon is we've brought together a panel of people working within the industry to talk about the solutions they're working on at the moment and also the way they see that particular part of the industry evolving and progressing. I've used the words they're evolving and progressing. You may wish to use different words. We will find out your views a little bit later. But what we're going to do to start us off this afternoon, I'm very pleased to say we're going to concentrate on biomethane used within heavy-duty transport, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome on stage now to talk about what he and his company is doing, the CEO of Landvermeer. Please welcome Zoltán Elek. Zoltán, thank you.
So I'm not going to talk very much about what Landvermeer is doing. We are a biomethane trader, but let's look at the role of biomethane. So we, as most of you followed, REPowerEU came up with this number, 35 BCM of biomethane. And I think we have also a few slides. Hope so. Otherwise, yeah, we can go to the second one, thank you. So there is a potential coming with it, and I want to start with a positive picture. So establishing the 35 BCM environment in Europe can be very interesting because biomethane can come with very positive aspects. So it can come with negative emissions, because turning biogas to biomethane, you have to separate the CO2. So you have pure CO2 stream, wonderful for carbon capture and storage, something which will not be completely from biomethane, but it can be a main source for biological CO2. We have different applications for this biomethane, high temperature application, heat and power in the cold season. So applications which will stay long after energy transition, but it's also a lot of value generation we can do. In the rural area, we can do additional environmental and climate protection. We don't have to, it can solve different challenges like the methane challenge we have in agriculture, because fermentation captures this methane emission we see there. And it can also solve issues like nitrate and so on, and establish a circular economy using the digest as a green fertilizer and so on. But to put some numbers behind it and to also show that what this industry, if we do it really right, can turn to. Usually if you set up the system, you would always have local CHP as a backup to use the biogas. And especially if we turn current existing biogas plants, which already produce around 150 terawatt hours of biogas in Europe, so there is already a lot happening. We can leave the energy production at site, but use most of the energy to put it into the gas grid. But the capacity you could combine with this 35 BCM around 25 gigawatt of reliable decentral energy production, which run perhaps only several hundred hours a year, but are there if solar, wind, gas, and so on are not available. The negative emission, 35 BCM could come with 55 million tons of negative emission. If we capture all the CO2 which is in the biogas, this is a huge impact which we could do. On the same time, we could avoid methane emission, which were equivalent of up to 100 million tons of CO2 if we focus mainly on manure, mainly on residues out of the agricultural area, but also bio-waste. And in the end, we're replacing imports of LNG, especially the dirtiest LNG we get on the global market. So this adds, again, 80 to 95 million tons of emission reduction. So if you all add it up, 35 BCM could be something up to 250 million tons of emission reduction by 2030. So it's a big chunk of this Fit for 25 goal we set. Now, what about heavy duty? Why is that the market we're looking at? I think the applications of methane should be discussed very closely. There are a lot of parts of the industry which should be focusing on hydrogen, especially chemistry, especially refineries and so on. There are a lot of parts of the consumption out there which should be electrified. Personal vehicles, for example, parts of the heating which are suitable for heat pumps. But there are applications where I think electrification is too expensive, hydrogen is too expensive, and this is especially in shipping, heavy-duty buses. If we look at shipping, we have engines in there which can run on LNG, which have efficiencies up to 65%. So they don't lose very much in compared with fuel cells, something like that, in efficiency. At the same time, the technology is available. We have cruise ships who used to run around with LNG, who could run on bio-LNG if somebody just pays the premium today. So AIDA could switch to bio-LNG next week if it's just about the logistics, but you know, the framework has to work. So there are this application. We will not see container ships coming from China running on batteries. We will not manage to convert all of this trucking and buses and so on into hydrogen, but also not into the electrification. And this is the area we should focus on, because this could be the good driver. This is the area with a very high willingness and ability to pay. So this is a big potential also to finance this 35 BCM. But looking at the market, my picture is not that positive. It's very nice that we're talking now about biomethane, much more than we did perhaps 2 years ago. And as Jerzy Buzek said at the beginning, you will never stop biomethane. Now looking back 15 years, in Germany we had targets like this. So Germany had a 10 BCM target for 2030, a 6 BCM target for 2020, and it faded out. They stopped promoting biomethane 6-7 years ago. And this is something we shouldn't forget. There are a lot of movements out there where solid, only electrifying energy world, a vision where we have all electric, is still driving the people. And this is very dangerous, because if we are very strongly into this dogmatism, if we just see single-minded, just one solution, and we constantly discriminate different sources of energy, then the path chosen there is not the right one. What we need is the combination. What we need is hydrogen and biomethane. What we need is hydrogen, electricity, and biogas, methane, and most of it renewable. So that should be the main target, that we set up a system as we have it today, which is based on different sources, which is more reliable and so on. And to show you what the situation in Europe is, perhaps we go to the next slide. We have to do a lot of framework here. We have to do a lot of legal framework. If we look at the different parts, renewable electricity, we have feed-in tariffs in all of the 27 member states. We have biofuel quota systems or whatever, like a tax exemption in every 27 member states. In all of these member states, we allow first-generation biofuels, which are under critics sometimes, or palm oil, to count towards the biofuel quota. And we have in all of these countries a CNG station. Most of them have LNG stations. But suddenly, if it comes to biomethane, only 7 of the member states accept biomethane or bio-LNG to count towards the biofuel quota. So there is a market, and also if it comes to heavy trucking. And these 7 markets, if you look at them, you see there is not a 7% biomethane at the CNG station, it's 100%. In every country where biomethane is accepted at the CNG station, since 1 or 2 years, depending on the country, it's 100% biomethane. So it shouldn't be called Erdgastankstelle anymore, it should be called more biomethane. Tankstelle. So there's much to do. Some countries, which perhaps don't accept biomethane at the fuel quota, at least established a production subsidy scheme, so which is very comparable to a feed-in tariff. Especially France did a great job there. They already translated the 30 BCM target to their country, so this is somebody who moves on. They do it in their way, it's a closed system, but it's really going ahead. Some other countries come up with quota system, for example, but you can do also feed-in tariff for electricity produced from biomethane. Currently just 2 countries do it. And what we don't have at all is a European market. So we have demand-side systems like quotas, but currently just 1 country allows imported biomethane in their subsidy scheme. So it's just Sweden where you can use imported biomethane to count towards the biofuel quota. And they didn't do it voluntarily. It was a decision by the European Court in 2017. So as you see, there is a lot to do. And we have to turn all of these numbers here in 27, also if it comes to the LNG for the filling station. And this should be done in the same speed and the same focus as we did, as we solved the gas crisis the last 12 months. We managed to do so. We managed to really ramp up the LNG infrastructure. We had the right people in place. We had the right task force. If we want to reach this 30 BCM target, we had to use the same speed, the same mindset we had in the last 12 months, now to turn parts of the methane renewable in a cost-effective way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What you're talking about and hitting the targets, increasing at such speed and with such volumes, it strikes me, how do you convince a potential purchaser, somebody within the heavy-duty transport sector that maybe wants to turn to biomethane, and they're making these financial decisions now? How do you convince them that actually there will be enough biomethane and the industry will be ready when they are ready?
Well, first of all, we need political stability. So it has to be a clear message. And for example, in Germany, Ministry of Economics hasn't used the word biomethane for the last year. So this is not stability. This is not a vision. So we need stability. They need to know that if they invest in LNG trucks today, that this system will continue, because they didn't have the stability now for the last 3 years, because suddenly prices went up, now they are down again, but this is frightening them. So what they need is stability for the investment, and the same for the producers. The producer has to invest in an LNG station, in electrification, and so on. So we need stability and a clear vision. Yeah, we're doing this, and we're not going away from this target. So this is very important.
So it's political stability. And the other thing about biogas, biomethane, a lot of it is very small producers in lots of different places. So how do you bring all of that together and harness that energy, that power for an industry like heavy-duty transport, when you are looking at such a decentralized production method with lots of different producers everywhere? Can you bring everyone together, is I guess what I'm saying?
Yes, we can. I think the industry shows that it works, because we moved in the CNG sector. In Germany, we have 800 CNG stations operated by 300 different utilities, and we managed to turn them 100% biomethane, sourcing from around 100 plants. So it works. There are traders who can do that. There are utilities who can do that. So we can scale this up. It's possible. But what we need is, a stable framework and the gas grid in between, because that enables a lot of decentral producers. They may be in Bulgaria, they may be in Finland, but it's an interconnected market. If we accept the whole gas grid as a mass balance and so on, this enables the market to grow and have and supply it everywhere in Europe. Yes.
Just a very quick thought on some of these are in very rural areas, dealing with communities who will have a say in planning. I can see by the look on your face, you know exactly what I'm going to ask you. But how do you deal with the planning issues that you have if it comes to scaling up? Farmers basically wanting to turn to this. Small scale producers.
I think the French system, but also the German had a very strong ramp up when we had free accessible feed-in tariffs and stuff like this. This is the easiest way to integrate small decentral producers in the system. But we manage that also in a bigger scale in biomethane. So if you have stable system, if they know they can calculate, they have a fixed price which they can work with for years, they manage to do so. But we have to accept that most of the production will be rural, it will be by farmers, but they go the way. They do it in France, they do it in Denmark. The structures are different, the plants are perhaps 5 times bigger, but still this is not, it's not the job of the gas industry to go into the agriculture, but to find a good interconnection, perhaps invest also a little bit on the capital side, but let the logistics be done by the people who like the rural agricultural logistics, which are usually the farmers or whoever does the waste management.
But have a good relationship between the two sides.
Yes.
Absolutely. Zoltan, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Zoltan Elek, thank you very much. Let's now bring our second panel on stage. So we're going to concentrate now on basically the next stage of using renewable gases within heavy-duty transport. That tricky problem, the problem that needs to be tackled and needs to be solved. So please, if I could welcome all the panelists onto stage now. I'll introduce you all as you come up, and then we can thank you at the end. But we have President of the NGVA Europe, Tim Keller. We have Nadège Leclerc, Senior Director, Government Relations and Market Development at Westport Fuel Systems. We have Julia Poliskanova, Senior Director, Vehicles and E-Mobility at T&E, and Katinka von Bonin, Environmental Manager at the IRU. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. So similar to our first panel, Eurogas has suggested that each of our panelists just take a moment to explain where they are, they and their company, they and their organization are within this area of fuel for heavy-duty transport. And Tim, I wonder whether you would like to speak first. I'll just take a couple of minutes. Would you like to come here or sit there?
Whatever you like. Yes, I think we even have a slide.
I think we do,
one
yes.
single slide to share, which should set the stage. So also welcome from my side. I'm Tim Keller, the president of NGVA, the leading association for natural gas vehicles, which is now turning into an association focusing on decarbonized and renewable gases to showcase, of course, the potential of gas, of renewable and climate neutral gases in transport. Why is it so important to speak about this specific sector? If we look at the carbon balance, at the CO2 balance of this specific sector, of the heavy-duty sector, we have to acknowledge nothing really has happened in terms of CO2 emissions. The sector is showing year after year, sometimes a little bit less, a little bit more, the same level of CO2 emissions. Not many things have changed over the last 20 years. And we have to ask ourselves, what went wrong here? How can we tackle this core issue? Yes, of course, we can say there's a sector to blame, but actually this is the wrong approach. We have to acknowledge that it is us who is driving transport. It is Europe and the economy and our wealth which is driving transport sector. So we have to understand that we have to deal with conflicting targets, conflicting interests here. And if we look at the chart, next slide please, it's a little animation in here. What kind of solutions do we have? Right now we have a very technology-oriented debate. We are focusing on specific technologies such as battery electric solutions or fuel cells with hydrogen for the heavy-duty sector. But all these technologies, if you dive deeper into them, you will see that they are not really available yet. We have to still wait some time to develop them and to create a significant market share. So we have to wait until we see an impact on the CO2 balance of the transport sector. And this is what drives us to promote existing and proven technologies, such as LNG trucks, such as biomethane trucks, to bring into the system, because we can start reducing CO2 in the sector without sacrificing the transport and the wealth that we have already next Monday and not next decade. And this is something I think we should take into account in all our discussions, that something that we have learned in the last year, that pragmatism and also resilience in terms of how to achieve certain targets plays a very important role. And if we look at the challenges that are ahead of us, we have to talk about different parameters. It's not only about a singular technology that we have to bring into the market, but we need to look at all these different dimensions and parameters that play a role, like speed of adoption, tailpipe emissions, the resource dependency, and of course we have to deal with growing demand on the other side, because transport is not going down in Europe. It is part of our economic growth, and thus we have to deal with a growing transport on our roads. And that's the reason why we need to focus on these things. Last click, please, because at the end, it's all about greening the energy for this specific sector. And that's the reason why it's so important to talk about heavy-duty trucks, because they are strong consumers of energy. One truck equals 30 to 40 households right now. And if we are able to decarbonize them with maybe green fuels, with we just learned from Zoltan about carbon negative fuels, I think we can contribute strongly. And that's the reason, and that's what I want to conclude with, why Energiewende and its members have concluded also to a clear roadmap to provide green fuels by the year 2050 to all filling stations, something that already makes an impact. We just learned it from Landwärme and Zoltan, but this is something that can be expanded if we have the right framework, and that's I think something that we should discuss.
Interesting, excellent, Tim. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think you just said the answer possibly to my question that was coming up at the end just there. You say nothing has changed over the last 20 years. We all got the frustration in your voice there. So what is the one thing, if there was a priority at the top, to make things change? I think you just said framework. Do you mean political framework, regulatory framework?
Indeed, we need to rethink how we discuss carbon reduction in transport sector. We already have regulation in passenger vehicles in heavy-duty sector since 20 years. But the bottom line is nothing has changed. So there must be some flaw in the system, and we have to analyze what is the flaw in the system here. And we're discussing the wrong things. That's my thesis. Okay, we will go on to your flaw in the system, what we should be discussing in a moment. Tim, thank you very much. Thank you. Would you like to come as well? We're going to be shuffling around here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just take a moment to tell you a few words about who we are. Westport Fuel Systems, we are an automotive supplier, and we are specialized in gaseous fuel components and systems for the various types of vehicles. So we have developed our own technologies, we have our manufacturing in Europe, and we work with vehicle manufacturers across the world to supply gaseous fuel systems for these vehicles. We have set the scene already a little bit about the challenge for the European transport sector between reducing emissions, reducing CO2, but also achieving it without impacting the efficiency and the cost effectiveness of this whole transport sector, which is crucial to our everyday life. And it's really more than just about vehicles and fuels. It's an entire sector, and I'm sure IR you can talk more about that. And just a few figures to show the scale of the challenge. We have more than 6 million heavy-duty vehicles in Europe, and it's projected to grow because we transport more and more goods. And it's an energy-hungry sector that emits a lot of CO2 and pollutants. And if we just take the heavier vehicles, those that are above 30 tons, so basically the big tractor trailers that you see on the highways, these are actually a small number of vehicles, but they represent 80% of the road freight delivered by trucks and more than 70% of the CO2 emissions of the heavy-duty vehicles. And this sub-segment of the heavy-duty vehicle sector is really the most difficult, the most challenging to decarbonize, because there are not many solutions available to do that today. It was said already that I think many of us here think that the future is about a mix of solutions, because battery electric vehicles will solve part of the problem, especially in urban areas, but they will not cover the entire needs of the entire sector, and partially because most of the CO2 emissions come from long haul. So that's also why we are really convinced that that we need a mix of solutions, and we need, of course, low CO2 solutions. We need not just tailpipe CO2 reductions, but also well-to-wheel life cycle CO2 reductions. And we are in a sector that needs solutions that are innovative, yes, that can deploy quickly, was discussed for biomethane, but that are also really practical and cost-effective, because we're in a sector with very thin margins. And it's a sector that cannot really afford to take risk with new solutions. So for this reason, yes, there's biomethane as part of the solution. We also think hydrogen has a good role to play in this future mix. And hydrogen for us means not just fuel cells, but also hydrogen used in internal combustion engine vehicles. And that's one of the key developments on which we are currently working. We are currently developing the hydrogen version of the LNG, of the HPDI system that is currently used in LNG trucks and deployed in thousands of trucks on the European roads today. We are really excited about this development, because it delivers really high performance, actually even an efficiency similar to fuel cells, higher than diesel. So some really interesting performance features that we are seeing here. And we think this solution with a cost that is also lower than many of other alternatives is a very good way to help create a faster adoption for hydrogen in the transport sector, because the more solutions you have, the more needs you fulfill, and especially for the diversity of needs that we have in this sector. Yeah, maybe I will pause here. We'll come back to the regulations, and there's a lot to say about the regulations and the complex regulatory system, but I'm sure we will come back to that in the discussion.
We will, absolutely. Nadej, thank you very much. Just before you leave the podium, the hydrogen within the LNG trucks, what is the timescale that you are looking at that?
It's not hydrogen in an LNG truck, so it's just the same technology. Yep. And we're just talking about a few years time to market, because a lot of the elements are already here. It's the same technology, even on the manufacturing side. The engine vehicle manufacturing is the same. So it's a really fast time to market.
And when you said, it was an interesting comment you made, that it's not an area, it's not a sector where people take risks. That risks with investment, risks with changing? Yeah, and so you will be constantly having to battle against that then.
Yes, and actually I was thinking about that when you were asking about previously about how to convince transport companies. I think it's a really critical aspect in this sector because if there is a risk, the transport companies, I mean, some of the large ones will invest, they will buy maybe hundreds, thousands of trucks, but if they don't have the certainty that they have a solution that will work in their operations, so that the practical aspect fulfill their needs with the CO2 reductions and the total cost of ownership that hopefully will be similar to diesel, they will not go for it unless they have some strong subsidies to get there.
I've written that down as a note of something that we will all discuss then, you know, actually how to convince the customer, because that's integral to everything, isn't it?
Indeed.
We can talk a lot about regulations, we will, but it's actually how to convince the customer. Nadej, thank you very much, thank you. Julia, do you want us to the podium or where you are? Oh, you're going to stay there. Let me swap then. We can have the handheld microphone on, please. It should be working now if you just
Hello. Yes, that works, right? Yes, I'll stay here if that's okay to make a few comments. I also realize we're running quite out of time, so I'll be brief and join in the discussion. So maybe first of all, thanks a lot for also having TNE at your conference. A really great day. Great to see so many of you. Maybe just to share 3 insights from our perspective as TNE, as a green transport and NGO here in Brussels. First of all, I would like to say that where trucks need to go, just like any other sector, is to zero emissions. And actually road transport is where we can and we have technologies to go zero. So our belief is, and that's where maybe I slightly diverge from previous speakers, is that solutions to go to zero emissions, zero emission vehicles are here. It's not just BEV. Yes, battery trucks will be part of it. And actually we already see them on the roads. They are happening. There is progress. But we also have hydrogen trucks, and within the definition in Europe of ZEV, it's also hydrogen combustion. So the mix of these 3 technologies will deliver decarbonization pretty much in all the different ways and operations. So the technology is here. The models are coming by pretty much every truck maker. If we look at battery electric trucks, they today do 400 or 500 kilometers on a charge. And when we look at how trucks are operated, because it's not about being in a city outside the city, it's how much you drive, right? There's very, very few trucks that drive more than 800 kilometers a day. So given European mandatory requirements on the brake, the trucks, the electric trucks coming today on the market can actually do the job. But as I say, there's a mix of zero-emission vehicle technologies. So for us, it's a mix of batteries and fuel cells. Now, the second point I'd like to make is really on the economics of it. I do think that it's important, again, to look at the data, look at the numbers, right? What matters for truck makers ultimately is, for operators, for logistics, is TCO, the total cost of ownership, right? The amount of kilometers you do, it's all about fuel costs. And here we have asked TNO in the Netherlands to do an analysis, and they show that actually on TCO basis, 5-year basis, an electric truck will already be as cheap to run and operate as a diesel truck in 2030, in pretty much 99.8% cases for the freight trucks. And when we look in the regulations, so there are some exemptions for vocational trucks, yes, actually 17% of various trucks are excluded from European truck CO2 standards, so there's plenty of space for other solutions, for example, renewable fuels. But within the regulation, the trucks that are regulated can really go ZEV, so battery or fuel cell, economically as well. And when we compare that to biomethane, well, the cost of biomethane are at least 4 times more than LNG today. So it's actually the most costly way to operate. And we were talking before about availability, and I'm happy to hear from experts here in the room, but last time we checked, there was no any large-scale biomethane liquefaction actually plant in Europe, right? Whereas in the case, for example, of battery electric trucks, we can really be part of the same ecosystem that is is being built for battery electric cars. It's the same supply chain. And my last point I wanted to make was, so where does it leave renewable fuels? Where does it leave, gases, and where does it leave biomethane? It's really important to stress that we have nothing against biomethane. It's a great solution and we need it in the decarbonization of the economy. But the priority should be given to those sectors which today rely on fossil gas already, rather than creating a gas dependency in trucks, and for, to shift biomethane, for example, buildings, heating, power generation, to replace fossil gas. When we look at the amounts of sustainably produced biomethane we can get, for example, from residues from wastes, we see that it's not even enough to replace all the fossil gas we use in buildings. So it's simply not the optimal use to shift that solution, which is needed in other sectors, to trucks, where, as I was mentioning before, other zero-emission vehicle alternatives are available. Thank you.
Julia, thank you very much. Thank you. You say not enough renewable gases, and they should go to particular industries that can't find an alternative. Is there enough green electricity being produced, or could there be enough green electricity being produced to actually run electric vehicles in the way that you're suggesting?
Yes, absolutely. We can build, the solar, the wind, and there's been many analyses made. I think it's important to understand that in our electricity system today already, we've built that system for peak usage. Right? So a lot of extra electricity capacity already exists, and in many times it's about managing when those vehicles are charged as opposed to building new electricity for them. It's not an issue of not enough energy. In most cases where the issue today is actually at the grid level to connect, for example, that, high power cable, etc., the connections, the permitting. And I would be very happy to discuss that. The grids are an issue, but not the lack of energy.
Okay. You started off your presentation by saying that your views differ to those on the panel. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in Katinka now, and then we're going to go straight back to how your views differ when it comes to assessing emissions and the regulations and the methodology for that. So, Katinka, if I could turn to you now from the IRU. Did you want to come here?
Julia's example. Can you hear me?
We can, if we can have Katinka's microphone on. Try again.
Hello, hello, hello.
Yes,
okay,
we have
better.
you now.
Okay, very good. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Sasha. And my name is Katinka von Monin. I represent the IRU here in this panel. And just a few brief words on who we are. We're a global federation of national member associations and corporate members representing road transport, commercial road transport, in more than 70 countries. So bus, coach, taxi, and trucks. And we are committed to decarbonizing the road transport sector in a sustainable way, in a non-disruptive way. So transport by road represents more than 75% of the overland goods transport. So heavy-duty vehicles play a vital role when it comes to security of supply. As you just mentioned, Nadej, it's essential on an everyday basis. So what are the key elements when it comes to the transition to decarbonization of this sector? The enabling conditions are, of course, the vehicles. So we need alternatively fueled vehicles in sufficient amounts of numbers and at affordable prices, of course. We need a dense network of infrastructure, of refueling station and recharging stations, and we need security of energy supply. So to ensure that all these conditions are met, what we have to insist on is technology neutrality. So we cannot just close doors for certain technologies, but we need all of the options in the market to be sure that we can continue to operate. So battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell are part of the solution, but have to be accompanied by the internal combustion engine. based on carbon neutral fuels, because their different technologies fit different operational purposes. And with the internal combustion engine based on carbon neutral fuels, we can profit from existing infrastructure, and we can start decarbonizing right away because the solutions are there, the vehicles are there, the fuels are there. So why close doors on these kind of technologies? And speaking of existing infrastructure, there are more than 125,000 fueling stations currently in the EU. That's something we should not ignore. From a regulatory approach, the European Commission is currently closing doors for certain technologies, which is really worrying in our view. They are aiming at planning security, but what they maybe put at risk is security as such. So instead, we need a technology open approach, leaving room for competition and innovation. For a well-functioning, stable functioning market, we need to have the economic operators to decide which technologies and fuels fit their purposes best to reach the target that we all have in common, and that's carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you, Katinka. Thank you very much. So I think that that sums up actually the different views on the panel. You're very clearly saying tech neutrality, and I think Nadej, that was something you said. Tim, you're going to nod at me. Yeah, for that, okay. Julia, that's not where you're coming from. So let me come straight back to you on that one. What is, as far as you're concerned, what is the issue with being, tech neutral and saying, let's have a situation where we're either transitioning or we are looking at different solutions for different markets or different areas or, or different situations? What's the issue there?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, we are not against diverse technologies as long as they are zero emission and they can get us to the net zero goal. I mentioned at least 3 technologies, right? So it's not, and then what is quite interesting and ironic sometimes in Brussels, people talk about technology neutrality, but actually promoting just one technology they represent. That's also not technology neutrality. We don't have investments in any technology. We just want them to be zero emission. And zero emission is fuel cell, battery electric, and today it's also recognized hydrogen combustion. So you do still have some combustion, right? That's one. The second point I would like to bring here, and maybe that's where we indeed disagree. So first of all, what do we talk about? Here today in regulations, we talk about new trucks. What new trucks come to the market? What are the engines, right? There's plenty of existing trucks, for example, to put renewable fuels that you were mentioning, carbon neutral fuels. So still potential there, but they don't all have to go into the new truck regulation. And let's bring a little bit of a, industrial policy into this. If we look at what China is doing, what the US is doing, they're quite clear. Almost half of the money in the US IRA is to secure battery supply chains and critical metals. In this world, if you want to win, given the limited amount of money, resources, and time, you have to focus. You can't just expect and invest equally in all the technologies. It's not possible. We don't have no time, no money. It's quite interesting. There was a really interesting analysis done a few weeks ago, maybe now actually more than that, when we started talking about industrial policy. And it was typical mistakes Brussels makes in industrial policy. And you know what was number 1? Technology neutrality.
I'm going to bring Tim in now. I mean, how do you feel on Julia's argument that you should just, almost, just pick one target, go for that, everyone heading towards that? Well, what would your response be?
Again, look at the bottom line of, I think my mic needs to be switched on. Look at the bottom line of the CO2 emissions of transport sector. 20 years of regulation focused on certain technologies and 20 years no change or no moving of the needle. We're always talking about technologies that are just around the corner. Batteries, hydrogen in trucks and so on. But why not focus on things that are here and really can make a difference? This is something that I'm following this field for quite a while now, which I don't understand. We are very focused on positive, future-oriented ideas, but forget about the present, which we need to change. And talking about climate neutrality, yes, of course, that's the ultimate goal that we need to reach. That's the technology that we have to have at the end. But when it comes to climate change, we're talking about the CO2 budget, the carbon budget. So every little step helps. And we have wasted so much time in terms of reducing the emittable budget that we have over the last 20 years that we really have to ask ourselves, are we on the right track? And I think with this focus on technologies that are not there yet, we're not doing us a favor.
Katinka, do you want to come in on that one?
I'm getting quite emotional when it comes to the term zero emission. I mean, what is meant by that? If the electricity that is used for an electric truck, for example, if it comes from coal, it's not zero emission. I really, this tailpipe approach is something that I just don't get it. Could you maybe?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to stress that life cycle, as what it encompasses, is regulated, but just at different stages. You have Renewable Energy Directive, ETS for the energy supply, right? You have renewable targets. What I don't believe is that we should take one regulation, be it a car maker standard or a truck maker standard, and put the entire economy on the shoulders of car makers to regulate. We are regulating life cycle, but in the way that's actually accountable to businesses that are accountable. We are doing life cycle analysis all the time. We have recently published a life cycle analysis of different truck technologies, and on that, battery electric truck still, yes, it's not zero, but it has the lowest CO2. So it's not, we don't have a truck maker here today on the panel actually, right? So I don't want to talk for them, but they all have their plans, and 80-90% they plan to go battery electric. Maybe it's a question to them actually, why are they not going so much for LNG trucks? And maybe I just really quickly say, I think for cars we had regulations, for trucks we never had regulations until 2019 actually. So it's not true to say we had 20 years of regulations. We had a lack of regulations in the truck industry.
What have we learned from the car sector?
And we have massive decreases in CO2 emissions in the car sector.
Do we?
Nadesh, do you want to and then I'm going to move on to an area which I think we're probably all going to agree on. I'm going to try.
I wanted to react on the availability of renewable or low or zero carbon energy, because I think in reality we will have competition between the different sectors for all the types of renewable energies. And yes, for biomethane there will be competition, but we have done some analysis, and we have concluded that if you use just 10% of the total biomethane potential of Europe, you can use it, you can make 20% of the heavy-duty trucks carbon neutral. So it's not about diverting all the biomethane potential from one sector to another. It's about using some bits and pieces of the different types of renewable energies and bring them as needed to fit the different needs of the transport sector. And I think we'll have the same problem with renewable electricity. If we are looking at electrifying the entire heavy-duty vehicle sector, with a mix of battery electric and hydrogen vehicles, even this would put an enormous stress on the renewable electricity production. And I hear it's possible. Yes, many things are possible. There's a lot of potential because there's a lot of wind and sun. But the reality is that we also need time to scale this up. And there are also a lot of uncertainties on many aspects related to this. So that's, I think, why each solution has its role to play.
Absolutely, which is where I was going to come to, but I'm very conscious of the time. Does anyone in the room wish to raise anything? We have a gentleman there. Is anyone over this side before I lose anyone? Okay, fantastic. Just a brief one, if I may.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Rajai Barakat. I'd like to speak as a consumer. Yes, I agree with you, Madam, when you said that zero emission is not possible because we have to produce electricity and we have to use many gas, petrol, all these things so as to produce this electricity. I went 3 days ago to Luxembourg and I saw on my way these horrible machines who produce electricity from the wind. No machine was functioning because there is no wind. There was no wind. Yesterday morning, I heard Mr. Steve Koning, who was the Vice Minister of Energy. He was in Brussels here in USA. He worked with President Obama. And he was not convinced that we can succeed, especially here in Europe, to have zero emissions. He was in his way to go to Saudi Arabia to the new city, Neom. Prince Mohammed bin Salman wants to create this city. And I asked him, do you believe really that it is possible to have this city with zero emissions? He said, oh, okay, we can have it, but we have to spend a lot of money, and no country can make it in all cities and towns. I think we have to be realistic and not to dream about all these subjects. We have to, the best energy is that for the environment is the energy that we do not consume. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anybody like to very briefly come back in on that?
I can just say one sentence maybe. So I certainly agree the best energy is energy we don't consume. Energy efficiency is absolutely first. I would say if we are talking reality, last year in Europe, renewables generated more power for the first time than natural gas. I think that counts for something.
Okay. Tim, you look like you wanted to come back in on that. You were as if you were about to say something. No? No?
Absolutely right, no.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, do we have any more? So I just, one thing that I would, gentleman down here, if we can get up one more microphone. Do we have, it's coming to you, sir. Fantastic. We just, a quick question from you, sir?
Yes, it will be very quick. The question is for you. You talked about the autonomy for the electric vehicles, for the lorry, for the trucks. You mentioned hydrogen, but what about the autonomy for a hydrogen vehicle? Because the heat density of hydrogen is far lower than other fuel that you can use. Do you have a refueling station on the way that you have to foresee? Or do you have a technology to condense the energy of the hydrogen in the truck?
I have to be very honest with you. We mostly look at battery electric trucks. So I can't really speak about the detail of hydrogen. I'm sure there may be some experts in the room who can answer that. Yes.
It's not a detail. It's a basic question.
Yeah, I can comment on that. It will depend. One of the aspects on which it will depend is how you store the hydrogen on board of the vehicle, and it's still partially an open question. One thing is quite clear is that for the heavy-duty vehicles to have enough range to do most of the work that they need to do, there will at least be compressed hydrogen at 700 bar, and that will be. I think everyone agrees now in the industry that this will be a common solution, and then there are potentially other solutions to store the hydrogen on board of the vehicle. One of them being, for example, liquid hydrogen. Yes, I see your face. There are some challenges related to this. Not everybody agrees that it will happen, but that's one option, and there are also other options that are more at research and development phase. So we are not at the end. We have not seen the entire panel of solutions. The work on hydrogen vehicles development has not been really at full speed for that long. So there are still innovations to come as well.
And if I may sort of actually take that point and enlarge on it, it sounds from what everyone is saying, this is an industry at the moment, or a particular part of the industry, which is very much in a time of change, whether or not it's regulatory change or consumer change, business change with people making investments, or indeed technological change as well, with everybody sort of I'll use the word fighting to get their technology to be either the one that is looked at or the one that is considered. So what I would like to do, and I'm very conscious of the time, I'd just like to go along the panel and with just a few words from you, just like to know if we move this on 12 months, so only 1 year, what will the shape of the heavy-duty transport industry look like? And I would normally say 5 years, but I'm saying a year because change is so urgent and things are moving so quickly. So I'm only going to say 12 months. And I would like you to be very progressive with your thoughts. And Julia, I will start with you. So what will the industry, this particular part of the industry, look like in 12 months?
Wow, what a question. Well, I'll say if I'm a pessimist, I will say there'll be a lot of electric trucks being scaled and produced and planned, but in the US rather than Europe, because of US IRA. If I'm an optimist, I hope that we manage to put in place and have an agreement on the truck CO2 standards that scale and bring the affordable supply of electric, but also fuel cell trucks in Europe, and we'll have some of it there. But without a strong signal here in Europe, at the same time, because of what's happening in China and the US, it's hard to see at the moment how we will actually compete in the race for the true clean tech.
Okay, you said you didn't want to be pessimistic, but there was a slight note of pessimism there. Katinka, so a year from now, what will this sector look like?
Well, first of all, I would like to remind everybody of the fact that heavy-duty vehicles are not only the trucks heavier than 40 tons. We're talking about buses, we're talking about coaches, we're talking about light trucks and heavy trucks. So there are very different use cases. And I think for some, it would make sense to go electric. For others, it might make sense to use hydrogen. For others, diesel might still be the option. And for others, it might be LNG. So we'll have a mix, and I hope we will continue to have a mix because we have different use cases and different needs in different sectors.
We will see in 12 months. Nadej.
Yes, we are in a sector in which the change is slow, actually. So I think in 12 months, I mean, we have a lot of very important pieces of regulations that are currently being debated. There's the CO2 standards for heavy-duty vehicles. There's Euro 7. There's the regulation on alternative fuels infrastructure. So all these pieces, they will not be solved in the next few months. And we need them to be solved to have clarity on where to go. And during this time, the developments that are ongoing will continue. I think the market will continue to adopt more alternative fuel vehicles. The biomethane trucks, there are more and more. It's not very rapid because the signals to make it faster are not there, but still it's happening at its own pace, at market pace. So this will continue, but other than that, to be honest, we will still be in the work in progress in 1 year. In 1 year, I think.
I think you had a smile at the end of like, yes, I agree. I agree with that. Tim, a prediction from you, 12 months.
12 months. Coming back to the question of liquefied biomethane, we will see half a dozen of plants running in Germany. That's happening. These projects are in the making. We have 100 filling stations. So the carbon reduction that we already have, 100,000 tons per year, out of the existing system using fossil LNG will be boosted to 700,000 tons a year with this rather small fleet that we already have in Germany. And this ramp up that we have seen in building filling stations in Germany, 80 filling stations during 1 year, that was happening 2 years ago. that can be scaled also within Europe. So we have a tool in our hand that will not solve all our problems, but will have a massive reduction on our carbon footprint in transport. And again, it's all about the carbon budget that we're dealing with, and not only a long-term target in the year 2050.
We will, I hope someone was taking notes, but we will see in 12 months' time. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panellists this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you so much. And James, if you would like to come and take the stage while we take our seats. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It has been a very interesting afternoon. We have learned many different things, but I'm delighted to say that we have the Director General of DG Energy, Didier, with us, who will give the closing speech. We've indeed covered much ground. We've been through Repower EU, and we've talked a lot about CO2 from cars, which I know is another DG, but in any case, Didier, we can say we're all very interested to hear your views and to see how you are envisaging the future of the gas sector in Europe. Thank you. The floor is yours. Welcome, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind welcome. Thank you for having invited me to give the closing speech at today's important event. It's a pleasure to be here. There's lots to talk about. I had the benefit of listening into this last panel, and I think it was an important discussion in a sector that's clearly lagging behind when it comes to the decarbonization. A lot to be done, a lot of opportunities in what needs to be done, but also important to focus not just on emergency and security of supply, a critical point also in this sector, and in particular over the last year, but also looking at the energy transition and the role of different types of gaseous fuels in that context. And if I take a moment on the transition, there is no energy security without the energy transition. There is no energy transition without energy security. And so we need to make sure as we go forward that our policy is aligned, that we keep our long-term strategic objectives in mind, our 2050 targets in mind, and that we make sure our policies address both the climate crisis and the energy crisis. And that's essentially what we have been working on over the last year in DG Energy, in the European Commission, in the European Union, but it's also what we've been working with Eurogas on to try to find solutions. And I think that cooperation is critical both for the energy security and the energy crisis, but also in the climate crisis. And let me start by saying some words about the crisis and what we've been doing during the crisis, but also what are the next steps and some of the important files there. Now, we are 1 year into the Russian war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion in Ukraine. We are still in a global energy crisis, but I do think it's fair to say that the European response to the energy crisis has both been united, it has been immediate, timely, it has been strong, and it has been effective in helping stabilize energy markets in Europe and stabilize prices. Clearly, gas suppliers like you have been helping with that, have been contributing to that. We have brought in new supplies from different suppliers, from other partners. We have also made a shift to other types of molecules, stepping up biomethane. We've made a significant step to reduce our demand, including energy savings, demand reduction, and we have made steps towards the acceleration of renewable energy, which is going to be an increasingly important part of our energy system between now and 2050, but with very significant and ambitious targets already for 2030. So as we go into this second year of the war, the second year of the energy crisis, we are in a better position than we were just a few months ago, and we are significantly more secure than what we were a year ago in an energy context. What we have done is we have reduced our overall gas demand by close to 20%. We filled our storages ahead of this winter, and we're going to leave this winter. We're going to go into the next storage filling season with our storage above 50% across the European Union. Quite an impressive number, and that will help us as we go into a second year of uncertainty. We have upgraded and optimized the use of our infrastructure, including the infrastructure needed to secure gas from alternative sources. We have managed to change the direction. Essentially, it was an east-west flow more than anything. That is no longer the case. It goes from north to south, south to north, west to east. So very significant changes in infrastructure and in how the industry and you operate. We have created the EU Energy Platform to aggregate our demand and jointly purchase gas. We have worked closely with you on that and welcome that cooperation. We have reduced our peak electricity demand. We have accelerated permitting for renewable infrastructure, renewable energy and related grids, and we have significantly increased renewable installed capacity over this past year. And then, as I mentioned, we have invested in an upgraded infrastructure, including interconnectors, at what has been bottlenecks across the European Union. So we now have that flexibility in the direction of our flows and securing gas to all parts of Europe. We have also been lucky. We have benefited from fairly mild winter. We have seen a fairly low demand in China. So there are external factors that have also helped bring us to a fairly comfortable situation today. And those external factors are, of course, still out there. And so, in other words, there are aspects that are outside our control when it comes to preparation for next winter and the years ahead. So global LNG markets, global gas markets do remain vulnerable to supply and demand volatility shocks that could occur, because there will be limited additional LNG coming online in the coming few years. There are uncertainties around the rebound of the Chinese economy. What will it mean? There are questions around the weather, definitely outside our control. There are questions around Russian supply. What will happen to those? And then there are, of course, critical infrastructure and security threats that are related to that, as we have seen. Those aspects, those external aspects, we can barely influence or not at all influence, but we need to look at what can we do, what can we influence, what is in our control. And the first aspect here that is our control is to make sure that we continue to reduce demand so we do not fuel a price hike or price volatility, and that we do not move towards a further shortage given the challenges in global LNG markets. And so we have just proposed a prolongation of the emergency demand reduction regulation that was adopted last summer under the Czech presidency, and suggest a prolongation of the 15% reduction target. We have carefully looked at the numbers, the data we have analysed, and see that this prolongation of our demand reduction targets is necessary to make sure that we go into a secure winter 23-24, but also, again, that we limit as much as possible the volatility in gas price markets, given the challenges in global markets. Another big-ticket item that we have been working on in energy policy over the crisis, and that will remain high on our agenda as we go into this next year, is, of course, Aggregate EU, our joint purchasing, the service that will provide demand aggregation and joint purchasing under this mechanism established within the European Union energy platform. We are starting that with member states, and member states have mandated companies to submit gas demand for aggregation. That should be equivalent to 15% of the gas that is needed to fill storage, so around 13.5 billion cubic meters as we go into this storage filling season. We are expecting Aggregate EU to actually aggregate by April 2023 a higher volume than that. It's a good thing. It means there's interest in this mechanism, interest in this tool that is important for our energy security and for how Europe places itself in global energy markets, global gas markets. We have had dialogue with the Association of Major Gas-Consuming Industries, and we see a significant interest among the consumers for this to go forward. They see an interesting opportunity. I know that for some of you, Aggregate EU and the joint purchasing platform is a somewhat mixed views so far. But we are in a global crisis. We're in a global energy crisis, and we cannot afford to see continued volatile and high prices. We cannot afford to see European industries leaving the European Union as a result of the high prices and the shortages. So we do need to engage. We do need to make this important instrument work. It is in our common interest, in the interest of Eurogas, and in the interest of the European Union, Europe overall. Aggregate EU was designed to support our companies, including gas trading companies, in their activities at global markets. We aim at attracting new volumes to Europe by leveraging the political and market power of the European Union. We aim at setting up possibilities also for gas trading companies to offer additional services to EU gas-consuming industries through company cooperation. It used to be called consortia. We are now talking cooperation, and providing services on behalf of, such as transport or balancing services, and in playing a role of central buyer. So opportunities there as well for gas trading companies. In order to enable the cooperation, we have engaged in very intense and in-depth discussions with many of you to try to identify what is the most efficient structure, what is the best way to go around aggregation and joint purchasing, and this cooperation of companies, including on the demand side. So we invite Eurogas members and all other interested companies to join the Aggregate EU and make best use of this framework to procure and sell gas. So again, thanks for the useful dialogue, for the useful cooperation on this, and we look forward to continuing the development and the making operational this important new energy policy tool. Our work in the energy platform is about securing the necessary molecules to Europe, and that's in particular through LNG, but it's also about securing the future fuels, such as hydrogen, green hydrogen. You will have seen recently the proposal for a hydrogen bank. So another aspect where we are working under the energy platform to bring Europe together and to make sure we have secure energy supplies and secure energy supplies that align with our objective for climate neutrality in 2050 and for a reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions already in this decade. As I said at the beginning, security of supply is of course a priority. Affordable energy is a priority, and the energy transition, sustainable energy, is a priority. And we cannot achieve one without achieving the other. So the implementation of the Green Deal, accelerating the energy transition, accelerating permitting for renewables, accelerating the development of green fuels alongside natural gas is absolutely a priority for European energy policy and for European competitiveness, our net zero industry across Europe, as we venture into what is a challenging time geopolitically in climate terms and in energy security terms. So we are not yet out of the crisis. Our crisis response requires also a response to the transition to address the climate crisis. These two go together. We need to align our policies in that, and we need to work with you across the sector. We see natural gas as being part of the energy transition, a necessary carrier of energy, a necessary molecule, but we see that number, that share going down over the coming decades, but part of the energy system through the transition, and so cooperation both on LNG and on green fuels, on green gaseous fuels, and on other parts of energy is a critical part of your work and of our work, and we look forward to continuing that dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Didier. It was a very comprehensive and holistic outing for this ending of this conference. I think it covered all the main points that we have indeed discussed today, and indeed touched on some of perhaps we haven't. But that is always a good thing about the closing speech. You get to have the last word and can decide exactly what messages you want to leave resonating in the room. It's good news, because for me it's the easy bit, it's to say thank you to everybody. I must, of course, start by saying thank you to Sasha for the great moderation once again. I would say thank you to the panelists and the keynote speakers for the great information, the great insight they offered us today. It's always very, very useful to hear the experts in full flow. Of course, I have to thank the team. They've been absolutely fantastic today, really making this conference the success that it is. I will also thank, of course, our supporters, Landwärme, of course, a very important biomethane player in Europe. And so thanks so much for making this conference as successful as it has been. And you, the audience, and the audience online, thank you so much for spending the time with us this afternoon. I'll allow myself a couple of reflections, if I might, on the conversations that we've had today. And I think it was very interesting, Sasha, that you pointed out that Cristina said unprecedented at least 3 times. It's because this time is unprecedented. I don't think we've ever been in our lifetimes in such an intense European war, and the consequences of that are being felt every day by us all. That's why we're very happy to have Oleksiy come and join us from Naftogaz today to talk about what he is also experiencing. This is an unprecedented time, and we are looking at what we can do to improve our security of supply, whilst at the same time not losing an eye on the future and making sure that we're following the decarbonization goals that we have to follow. I think the second panel is also very interesting because we focused very much on how to decarbonize one of the most polluting sectors of the economy today, the heavy-duty transport sector. And I think there was a broad sort of, I would say, a coalition of agreements around the need for technology neutrality, except perhaps in one or two parts of that debate. And I think that we will hope that the proposal from the European Commission will be improved so that we are able to make sure that we use the right technologies to deliver the decarbonisation that that sector will definitely need to deliver upon if we will have a net zero Europe even before 2050. We talked about solutions. We talked about solutions all morning, all through the first panel. The solutions that we have for the emergency situation we find ourselves in. Not always all of them are agreeable to all of us, I know that. We all know that. But we are doing our best to stomach what we have to stomach to get through that crisis. We've talked about solutions for decarbonisation, and in particular, we've talked about solutions for decarbonisation in the transport sector. Today's conference is called A Pathway to Solutions. I would like to leave you with the point that the gas sector is on a pathway to solutions, and that is because of the great work that we and the people that we interact with do every day. So I finish with a grand merci. Thank you very much. Let us keep on that pathway and let us get to the solutions that we need. Thank you very much.